Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us again here on AL.com's Facebook Live. I am pleased today to be with longtime friend and author Alelia Bundles. Now, those of you who know Alelia know that she is the great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, known as the first African-American female millionaire, a queen in the hair care product industry, a pioneer. And Alelia wrote her book called The Life and Times of Madam C.J. Walker on her own ground. I wrote it in 2001. And then, of course, this March, the film was finally made. It was called Self-Made, a film about the life of Madam C.J. Walker, and it starred Alabamian Octavia Spencer. Now, the reason we're here today, Alelia, is because you wrote a pretty telling piece recently criticizing the filmmaking process. So before we get into that, thank you for being here. And how are you doing today?
You know, I'm fine. I think we're all in the midst of this, like, we don't really understand what's happening next situation. I'm feeling very blessed that I'm healthy. My household is healthy. We have a roof over our head. So, and then thinking about all the people who are suffering. But it is really, you know, Alabamian Octavia Spencer was great in the role of Madam Walker. And I am so grateful that she thinks of Madam Walker as someone who is important. So, you know, all kudos to her for the role she played.
So let's go back to the beginning of the film process. I mean, anybody who writes a book would love to see their book turned into a film. So talk us through this journey. It began, what, 3 years ago?
Well, 3 years ago, but you know, the real truth is it began 50 years ago. When I was a senior in high school, I wrote my first paper about Madam C.J. Walker and her daughter, Alelia Walker, and about the Harlem Renaissance. And then I've written 4 books about Madam Walker. On Her Own Ground, The Life and Times of Madam Walker is the book that is the inspiration for Self-Made. And I had, when that book came out in 2001, during the first decade, I had a couple of different movie options and they fell through, which is a very typical Hollywood story. Then we had this decade of nothing with Black people gets made because it won't sell overseas. And then in 2015, interest began to come back again. And I started the process of making a decision about whom I was going to do something with. And that ended up being the team that put together Self-Made.
Now, part of that team was LeBron James's production company. And what was it like having him part of the team, and what role did he play in helping to make it happen?
Well, you know, I've never met Mr. James. Spring Hill Entertainment functions, you know, without him being there every day. So there were a couple of Spring Hill representatives who were part of the writing room team, but I didn't have any interaction with him. And my understanding is that he never visited the set. So I don't think he was involved in the minute-to-minute process.
You had a pretty prominent production team working behind the scenes with you. Casey Lemons was the director. Many people know her from Eve's Bayou. Now, am I correct in thinking that this was pretty much among the leadership team, all African-American women?
It was, which is pretty amazing to have 2 Black women directors, a Black woman head writer, 2 Black women showrunners. That's kind of a term most people don't know, but showrunners are basically the people who sort of oversee the minute-to-minute process of production. A Black woman who was director of photography, a Black woman who was Canadian, who was the production manager. So yeah, that is really pretty amazing.
Now, the head writer was Nicole Jefferson Asher. She's also worked on other projects, including Toni Braxton's Unbreak My Heart. What was your relationship with her through the process, and when did you start to feel as if things might be going awry?
Well, so this is an interesting thing for me. When Mark Holder, who is the producer, the person who actually acquired my book, I had great conversations with Mark, and he and his wife went out and they were trying to sell the project. They're the ones who brought Octavia Spencer into the project. She came in saying, I want to be not just an actor, but I want to be an executive producer. But she really wanted to make sure that there were Black women who were part of the creative team. Mark and his wife, Christine, are white, but you know, they were really, I was really simpatico with them. about their vision and their appreciation for Madam Walker. And Nicole Asher was brought on. She and Casey Lemons apparently are very close to each other. So they came as a team. And Casey Lemons was still working on Harriet. So her attention was not entirely focused on this. And Nicole Asher had a vision of what she wanted this to be like. She seemed to think that she needed to find a way to appeal to a younger audience. I often heard during the scripting process, this is not a documentary. This is boring if you do it in that way. And I, of course, think history is really interesting if you can tell it right. But I had a conversation with Nicole Asher in November of 2016, I think, 2015. And then didn't talk with her again for more than 2 years. But our conversation, she said this is the direction she wanted to go, focusing on the conflict between Madam Walker and her real life rival, Annie Malone, who became Addie Monroe in the film. And I said during that conversation, I don't really think that that's the centerpiece of her life. And so then there were no more conversations for a couple of years from me. So not because I didn't try.
I mean, that sounds amazing to me. You're the author of the book. It was the inspiration for the film, and you did not speak to the writer for 2 entire years during the process?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that was really frustrating to me because I would send notes and say, hey, happy to fly out there whenever you need me. I'm doing some new research. I would love to share it with you. And I would get these kind of, kiss off, oh yeah, we're going to talk to you eventually, but nothing happened. I mean, and that really went on for months. It was confounding, honestly.
So at some point during the process, you wrote in this article you did for The Undefeated that you saw an email or an Instagram post actually from the writer who said she had sent the script to Netflix and hooray, they didn't have any notes. And you had not really signed off on it. Now, what was your agreement? Did you have just approval, or did you have approval, or did you have just review of the script? Explain that difference to people.
Yeah, and so this is an interesting thing for me. One of the reasons that I was really interested in working with Mark Holder is that Mark really appreciated the work I had done. And I had a previous project years and years ago in the 1990s, 80s actually. Alex Haley was interested in doing something, and I had been very much a part of those conversations. And so I thought, I come as a package. I'm the person who's the expert, and I know all of the touchstones and the pressure points and all of that. So I thought that I would be able to make a contribution. But I think I was seen as a threat and as some kind of impediment to this sort of creative license that Nicole Asher believed that she had. So as I kept asking for questions, I would send a note to her and say, hey, I'm finding some new things. Would you be interested? And then I would get this sort of kiss off, and then I would try to communicate through Mark. And well, they're not finished. There's nothing to show you yet. But the contract, the way it was negotiated, was that they would not give me executive producer credit, even though lots of people had executive producer credit. And they said, well, you can have script review, but you're not an executive producer. Therefore, you can't have script approval. But I know that title means a lot, and people have told me it means a lot. But I think that even if you have the title, if someone doesn't want to include you, they will find ways to exclude you.
So talk about some of the ways that you thought that the film diverted from the book. And I think the main one that I saw in the article you wrote was how they turned Addie into Addie, but made her light skinned to really show a conflict between light and dark skin, which you and I both know goes back centuries in our community. It's not a new story. I'm not sure why that supposedly appeals to young people, but they set that up as a conflict when in fact, both women had similar skin tones. So that is something that clearly did not exist. Talk about that in other areas where you thought it just took a left turn from the facts.
So, and I just, want to put this in context because so many people who were working on that film worked really hard. The crew, the cast, the people who tried to put this together in 8 weeks. So I want to honor those people who really were working on this project because they wanted to uplift Madam Walker's legacy. So I don't want to do any shade on them because I appreciate them. But they could not control the fact that this storyline had been created by Nicole Asher and Casey Lemons. And part of what they wanted to do, and I can't read their minds, but it seems to me from what they've said, is that they thought by having this conflict between two women, that somehow that would draw people in. And so initially it was about Annie Malone, and then the name was changed. When I got the first script, it really was Empire or Real Housewives of Atlanta. They were cursing at each other. They were physically fighting. And I'm like, what is this? This would not have happened. These women were early 1900s respectability politics, but that was the way they wanted to tell the story. And because they wanted to double down on colorism, they changed the complexion of the original rival to be Addie Monroe with light skin, and made that into something that really was not those women's major conflict with each other.
Have you heard from any of Annie Malone's descendants at all about since the film came out?
Well, yes, not indirectly, because they think that I'm part of this sort of cabal against their relatives. So that's been really, challenging for me. Because when I wrote On Her Own Ground, I did a lot of the original research on Annie Malone. Her family members have not done the same level of research on her that I have. And I included it in the book. I developed the relationship. And, I did have an interview with a woman who used to be the executive director of the Annie Malone Orphans Home in St. Louis, who now works with a nonprofit group that promotes Annie Malone. And she sort of came at me like, you have tried to erase Annie Malone. I'm like, no, in fact, I wrote about her, and serious scholars of Annie Malone credit my work. So I've really tried to give her her due. But I think her family members need to do a lot of their own work. The challenge for them is that they don't have a lot of documents. And we are really fortunate that Madam Walker, because of the executive team that she surrounded herself with, saved material. So there are almost 50,000 documents, her letters, her business records. Most of those have been digitized at the Indiana Historical Society. Because of some of the decisions that Malone made and some of the vagaries of her life, they don't have the same kind of document. So it's much harder to document what she did.
You talked about some of the other mischaracterizations. One was a business partner that Madam Walker had, and how it was portrayed in the film was not exactly accurate. Can you speak about that too?
Sure. So many people who know their history are familiar with Stanley Nelson, the documentary filmmaker, the MacArthur genius. And Stanley's grandfather was F.B. Ransom, Madam Walker's attorney and the general manager for the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company. Now he would be CFO, CTO, CIO. He was the man for all seasons and her general counsel. And he is portrayed in the film as being there and being sort of a loyal lieutenant, but not really given his due. And one of the characters that the scriptwriter and the showrunners created is a character called Sweetness. So you can just imagine if he's called Sweetness, right. He's a pimp. And
we don't use that name a lot in the community. When you use it very purposely.
Use it purposely. Now, Bill Bellamy played the role. A lot of people love Bill Bellamy. I'm not, putting shade on Bill Bellamy, but it's the character that was created because, as one of the showrunners said, it was a conceit that they wanted to develop. I always worry when somebody says they're doing a conceit, but they wanted to work in the fact that Madam Walker was involved in the anti-lynching movement. So they developed this character who was supposed to be F.B. Ransom's cousin. The character was fake, didn't really exist. And that character had F.B. Ransom bet on the numbers, and he hit the numbers supposedly. and invested in the company. Well, two problems with that. F.B. Ransom had taken a pledge as a young man to never drink, smoke, or gamble. So he would have not done
That's a big problem. That's a
right.
big problem.
And then he, he would have been the person who was keeping Madam away from somebody like that. Now, that said, I do totally understand that in our community and in any community that is struggling, there are people who are smarter than everybody else around them, but who aren't given opportunities. And so who end up doing things that may be illegal in order to survive. They could have survived doing other things. They could have excelled doing other things. So that was the way that that character was developed.
You also talked about the character of Booker T. Washington and how he was portrayed in the fact. Now, see that face, right?
Yeah, well, you talk about, these people have relatives. They have descendants. So it's not just Annie Malone and it's not just F.B. Ransom, who's, has grandchildren, Stanley Nelson, Jill Nelson, a very well-known journalist, and other family members. But Booker T. Washington has many descendants and many family members. And so
well known. I mean, it's not as if people don't know who Booker T. Washington is or that he hasn't been written about. So that's what's striking to me as well.
Yeah, and in Alabama, obviously people know who he is. But yes, and I am friends with some of his descendants. But the real story of him is like, yes, in the film, it makes it seem like he is telling her, Black women can't succeed because they'll outshine Black men. Well, that never happened. And in fact, in what happened in reality, they did get off to a rocky start. She wasn't part of his inner circle, and she kind of pushed her way in. And then she did speak at his convention, and she, pushed forward and made this amazing speech. But the outcome of that is that the next year he invited her back as the keynote speaker. And then when he came to Indianapolis for the dedication of the Black YMCA, to which she had made a contribution, she sent her chauffeur to pick him up. And he was a guest in her home. So there was a full circle story that I think was much more interesting than just sort of using it as a device to say men are sexist.
Now, even though you felt this way, you did not speak up when the film came out. You were supportive. You did the tour. Obviously, from a business standpoint, you wanted the film to succeed. And so that's understandable that you didn't come out with these thoughts prior to the debut of the film in March. What was it like that night when you began to see the criticism on Black Twitter, on Instagram? What did it do to you as you saw that people were reacting to the film in that way?
Well, I knew what was coming. And I will say that while during the tour, I was speaking my truth, but I also was measured in what I was saying, because again, lots and lots of people worked really hard, and I didn't want to destroy their good work. But I had been speaking up for months, really for years, as I got scripts, as I was seeing what was going on. This was no secret amongst the producers and amongst the people who were involved, but they were really sort of hoping to gaslight people and that they could move on. But that night, I knew what was coming because some critics had seen it and they were starting to do reviews. There were, people had seen the trailers and they were making comments. So I did a Twitter chat with my good friend Harriet Cole as people were watching, so that I could make comments and anticipate what people were doing. So I was trying to sort of, take the reins on this. And I wasn't surprised at what I was seeing. And I wanted to be positive where I could be positive and talk about the things that I thought were good. Appreciate the fact that people now knew Madam Walker's name, but I also wanted to speak my truth and let people know that there were things that I had problems with.
So in hindsight, what might you have done differently? What could you have done differently? And what advice do you give to authors who are seeing their books optioned and having them made into film projects?
So this, what so many of my friends who work in Hollywood told me from the beginning, they said, get an executive producer title. If you don't have the executive producer title, they will do whatever they want to do. So I heard that. I tried to do that, and I didn't have enough leverage to do that. And as I say, even in this situation with this set of people, I think they would have still found ways to keep me at arm's length. So that might have solved some of the problem, but I live in DC, they're in LA. So, one can debate that. But the thing that I know now is that it's really important for me to speak up right now, because there are lots of people whose books are being optioned. And this is going to repeat itself over and over again if we don't begin to change the dynamic. And I think there are historians and journalists and storytellers, and there are people in Hollywood who are people of goodwill and who really want to tell the stories with integrity. And I believe we can begin to have that conversation so that we are telling these stories more authentically. So what I would say to people is that you need to have a really good entertainment lawyer, intellectual property person who understands the reins, who knows the players, and who advocates for you so that you are in the writer's room, at least if you're not like living in the writer's room, because all of us have other lives, that you are being consulted, that you sit down and have dinner, maybe a couple of times with whoever the writer is supposed to be, that you get to know the directors, and that you don't just say, oh, this is, everything is going to be all right. I had a lot of faith that things would be okay. And, now I don't. But now I know a lot more people with whom I feel a kindred spirit.
Now you have another book project that you're working on. I believe it's on Madam Walker's daughter. Is that right?
So I'm almost finished writing the first major biography of Madam Walker's daughter, Octavia Walker. And that I'm very excited about that, because just as when I was writing about Madam Walker, most of what people knew sort of fit into a paragraph that was mostly inaccurate. And so now her story is more accurate, despite the, crazy stuff that happened with the film. There's still a lot that people can find now about Madam Walker. I'm trying to do the same thing for her daughter, who basically has been put into this little box of Madam Walker made the money, her daughter spent the money, she had parties during the Harlem Renaissance, the end. And of course, no one is that pathetic. So what I have tried to do in this book is to give her many dimensions, to show that she truly was a major patron of the arts. She traveled internationally to London, Paris, Rome for the coronation of the Pope, Addis Ababa to meet the Empress, Cairo, and to show that what was this Black woman doing, moved to Harlem in 1913, died in 1931, knew all the major artists, musicians, writers, and actors of that era, and her place was the go-to place.
So Lydia, before we go, give our viewers a sense of what you would like them to know about Madam Walker, whether they've seen Self-Made or not, and what they should take from her legacy, from her efforts, from her philanthropy, and how that in context should be viewed in terms of, not just the film, but your book and everything we know about female entrepreneurship today.
So, Roy, I just want to thank you for great questions. I just, as a journalist myself, I'm like, thank you so much for the questions that you've asked me. So behind me, people can see my books, On Her Own Ground. There's a special edition with the Self-Made title with Octavia Spencer on the cover. I hope people will read the book. I hope they'll come to my websites, aleliabundles.com and madamcjwalker.com, where they can really learn about her. But the thing that I want people to remember is that this is a woman, truly the first child in her family to be born into freedom in 1867 in Delta, Louisiana. But by the time she died in 1919, she was 51 years old. She had become a millionaire with a mansion in the wealthiest community in America, and that she had provided employment for tens of thousands of African-American women who otherwise would have been sharecroppers and maids and laundresses and cooks. And those women were able to create generational wealth. She planted the seeds of political activism so that even many years later, when the March on Washington Film Festival happened, the beauticians, many of whom were Walker trained, helped pay for the buses for people to come to Washington. So her legend and her legacy continues to live and continues to inspire kids who are doing Black History Month reports and CEOs of major corporations.
Well, Lee, I just want to thank you. We've known each other for a long time. I've known about this book for years before it was done. I've been very proud of you since it came out. I was happy for you that it was made into a film. And even though it didn't turn out the way you wanted, it is still an inspiration for people. It was a way to put Madam Walker's name in the atmosphere again, to reintroduce her to not just people who already knew her, but to introduce her to a new generation. So thank you for your efforts and your perseverance and your honesty, not just today, but in writing this article and shedding light on the process, hopefully for other authors who become part of film projects. They'll learn from this, and we'll see more, as you mentioned in the story, hidden figure type films that are more accurate, that give us the light, that give our sort of historians and people that made history for us the light that they should deserve. And hopefully we'll continue to see that. So thank you, and good luck with your new project. Hopefully we'll see a film on Madam C.J. Walker's daughter.
We will. A film and all kinds of other things are in the works. So it's coming. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alelia. Bye-bye.